State Representative Amanda Clinton is my next guest. Welcome.
Hi, Sam. Thank you so much for having me. It's so good to see you.
It's good to see you.
Yeah, nice to see you.
I hear a lot about you.
Oh, all good, I hope.
It is. There's a lot going on that I think folks at home don't know about. And I don't mean it's a big clandestine secret, but we need to start paying attention if it's not already too late.
Yeah.
You authored a bill, House Bill 3392, did you not?
Yes, sir. Yep.
And what happened?
So my bill would have required the Corporation Commission to study the impact of data centers on our electricity grid, how large load users impacted consumers when they would come onto our grid, because over the summer, fall, this past fall, I conducted what's called an interim study at the legislature, which is just finding out more about a topic that you're interested in or that you want to know more about. And whatever you find out may or may not inform legislation that you author. So I hosted an interim study around data centers. And when I started out, I was mostly alarmed about water. Water was the thing that really caught my attention. I would say about a year and a half ago, I read this article in the Tulsa World, and it said, planned data center for East Tulsa to use, I think it said 2 million gallons of water a year. And I thought, gosh, that sounds like a lot. I mean, I'm no expert, but that sounds excessive. And I'm sorry, I think it was 2 billion. It was something huge. I can't even remember. I couldn't wrap my head around the number, I think is the point. So that's what got me interested in the data center issue, was how much water they use. And for people who aren't aware, they need water to cool their servers. The servers and the chips get very, very hot. But as I conducted this interim study, which was primarily focused on, maybe 80% water, 20% electricity, I really, my fears began to even out a little more and become more inclined to be more, worried about the electricity usage of data centers. As I read documents filed by PSO making their case for a rate increase, they noted that their largest customer they had ever served in the history of their company required about 130 megawatts to operate, but they had letters of agreement with a company that needed 1,000 megawatts, which is a gigawatt. And they had 11 letters of agreement with companies that needed, I believe it was 50 megawatts or more. So when you're talking about a power company that says the largest customer we ever served needed 130 megawatts, and you have 11 letters of agreement with companies that need 50 megawatts or more, and then one with a company that needs 1,000 megawatts, that to me really set off the alarm bells in my head.
The red flag went up.
Absolutely, absolutely. Because, we're going to build out this grid, and eventually, you and I and regular everyday consumers are probably going to pick up the tab unless some guardrails are put around this industry. So that's what led me to write that bill, which would have required the Corporation Commission to study what happens when a large load user, first of all, define what is a large load user. Is it 50 megawatts? Is it 100? Is it 150? We have no definition for what a large load energy user is. So that was one ask of the Corporation Commission. And then the other was to study the impact on our grid and on consumers every time a large load customer would come onto the grid. As I worked my way through, as my bill was working its way through the legislature, there were a couple other bills about data centers that were also out there. And one was my colleague Brad Bowles' bill, which was House Bill 2992. And it actually defined a large load energy user. I think it's 75 megawatts, and put some other guardrails in place and consumer protections. And his bill actually went further than mine did. I was trying to take a pretty measured approach, a very informed approach, because in my opinion, you can't legislate or regulate something you have not yet defined.
Yeah.
But this industry is moving so quickly, I think that we don't necessarily have time for a study. We need to put some guardrails up really quickly. And so that's what my colleague's bill did. So I willingly let mine go and joined on as a co-author for his. He's a Republican, I'm a Democrat. I think I'm very heartened that there is bipartisan agreement that this industry is moving really quickly and needs some guardrails. So I was very happy to join him on his bill, which passed the House floor this week.
What's the flavor of the legislature right now? Are they all of a sudden paying attention?
I do think people are paying attention. I was kind of surprised there were not more bills around data centers, but there were some. There were a couple from my side of the aisle, a couple from the Republican side of the aisle in the House, and then there were some also in the Senate. But I believe that this is probably the number one issue that we should be looking at as a state. There are so many concerns. I could sit here and talk about it all day, but if you want to ask me some specific questions, I can kind of share my thoughts around it.
Well, let's try this. Has the Corporation Commission moved on it?
They are moving on it. So I've had really productive conversations with the Corporation Commission. I think they see that this is a very big issue that they would like to get their heads around. They were already looking at different large load tariffs. So while they were doing their thing and I'm doing my thing and my colleagues are also introducing their bills, I think what we're all doing is moving toward some sort of a system that safeguards regular everyday consumers like you and I.
The threat that looms out there, I don't think people understand. I don't understand all of it.
Yeah.
It escapes my feeble little brain. But I'm smart enough to know we better do something pretty quick.
Well, Sam, I've known you a long time and you don't have a feeble little brain. So let me just start with that. But yeah, I mean, there are so many concerns around water, electricity. One of my great fears is that they put up these huge, big buildings that are going in kind of rural and suburban communities. And technology, the whole point of technology is always to get more efficient, right? You and I were talking earlier, and in the 50s and 60s, computers would take up the entire size of this room, when now we have millions of times that computing power in a little bitty phone. So my fear is that technology is already getting better, faster, the chips are getting more efficient, that we're not going to need these huge buildings, but right now there is this, what I would like to call a land run on data centers here in Oklahoma, but also just really across the United States. Developers are trying to stake their claim. I think they see a lot of, dollar signs, but I'm just not sure that we're going to need these big buildings after a while. The whole point of technology is to get more efficient. So I think that at some point, these big buildings might only be good for laser tag and nothing else.
All right, well, I'm going to sidestep to another part of politics for a minute.
Sure.
Were you comfortable with the choice that the governor made to fill in for Mark Wayne Mullen?
Okay, so yeah, he chose Alan Armstrong, who's a very well-respected businessman in Tulsa, Oklahoma, across the United States. I think that was a good choice. He's someone who doesn't appear to have political aspirations beyond this. I think it's to be commended to step up and serve in that way when you do run a large energy company, and it's just for a few months. So I think that I thought that was a good choice. It's not someone who has a lot of has been very out there publicly in the political realm and has polarized people or polarized the general public. So yeah, I think that was a good choice.
You have gone on record. You're Cherokee.
Yes, sir.
You've gone on record as saying that, and let me just read a quote here, you're committed to education, educating your counterparts on the importance of tribal sovereignty, saying relations have reached an unacceptable point. What do you mean?
Well, I think it's pretty obvious if you live in Oklahoma and you pay attention to the news at all. Kevin Stitt has been the most hostile governor toward tribes, I think probably in state history. I just think his whole term has been a waste. I think if you're Kevin Stitt and you look back on the last 7 years, you can't objectively say that you have done much of anything except for fight with the tribes. I worked for the Cherokee Nation for 15 years. For the last 5 or 6 years, I've been consulting with other tribes and across Indian country. And the missed opportunities that we have seen from just economic development partnerships, even on the criminal justice stuff. McGirt was, instead of embracing that and saying, hey, who doesn't, people always want more police, right? Well, the tribes have police forces. So when has anybody ever turned away more cops, for example? Oklahoma, and admittedly, McGirt was a little bit of a surprise for the tribes when it was handed down. So our courts were not necessarily fleshed out the way they needed to be, but I would argue that the state of Oklahoma has been, running courts for over 100 years, and theirs aren't very good either. So if we could have just had some time to ramp up and get some robustness to our court system without the governor fighting us all the way. I think of the places we could have gone since then, and just the partnerships that we've lost out on over the past 7 years.
Your mother was a school teacher.
Yeah, she is a school teacher. She's been teaching for 54 years.
And still teaches?
Still teaches, yes.
God love her.
Shout out to Pat Clinton.
We need more.
Yes, shout out to Pat Clinton at Kansas Public Schools.
Well, the primary issue of people she spoke to was education.
Yeah.
Are they getting that educational focus from our legislature?
You know, it's very interesting that the various approaches that people are taking to education. They want teachers and kids into the classroom more, but they don't necessarily want to put more money toward that. It was very eye-opening to be on the floor this session so far and see how we have voted to educate kids about fentanyl, more math, more recess, test their vision, multiple times, test them for dyslexia multiple times. And I just think from an education standpoint and thinking about my mom, who's actually administering tests this week, how much we're asking teachers to fit into one day. Of course, we would all love all of these things, but the school day is only so long, and these little kids, especially the elementary, middle school. I mean, their brains can't absorb too much of that, and we're putting so much on the teachers. They went to college to be teachers. They didn't come to teach because they wanted to be social workers and janitors and therapists and disciplinarians and all that. They came to be teachers. So
I'm so glad you said that. I am so glad.
Yeah, I mean, they're wearing a lot of different hats, and I don't know that we're giving them the support that they deserve and that they need, as much as I feel like we're putting a lot of new mandates on teachers, and I hate that.
Tell your mom I'm going to say a prayer for her tonight. God love her.
Maybe every night, also, but definitely right now during testing. And there was a bill that just passed this last week, and it was about pushing testing to the last 3 weeks of school. I voted against it because I think kids are at that point have spring fever. They're tired. They're field trips.
We're out of time.
Already?
I'm so sorry.
Oh, Sam. Okay, bummer.
Will you come back?
Absolutely.
All right.
Anytime for you.
Take you up on that. That's all the time we have. We'll see you here next time.